Nobody saw this coming. Not the fans. Not the media. And certainly not the people who believed Caitlin Clark had already reached the highest level of influence possible. Because over the last few days, a conversation has quietly started spreading across the basketball world. At first, it sounded like another rumor, another social media theory, another headline that would disappear within a few hours. But then something strange happened. Instead of fading away, the discussion got bigger, much bigger, because somehow, three of the biggest names in basketball suddenly found themselves connected in the same conversation. Caitlin Clark,
Nike,
Michael Jordan. And just when people thought the story couldn't get any more surprising, another name started appearing everywhere. Sophie Cunningham. Now that's where things became very interesting. Because nobody expected Sophie Cunningham to be part of a discussion involving one of the most valuable athletes in sports, the most powerful brand in basketball, and the greatest player many people have ever seen. Yet fans couldn't stop connecting the dots. Questions started flying. Speculation exploded. And social media turned into absolute chaos. Because whether these rumors are true or not, one thing has become impossible to ignore. Caitlin Clark's influence is no longer just changing the WNBA. It may be starting to reshape the entire basketball business landscape. And what people are discovering next could be even bigger than anyone imagined. Long before Michael Jordan's name entered the conversation, long before Nike's latest buzz started dominating basketball discussions, Caitlin Clark had already become something the sports world rarely sees. A phenomenon. Not just a star. Not just a great player. A phenomenon. The kind of athlete who changes the direction of an entire sport. When Clark arrived in the WNBA, expectations were already enormous. Every arena she visited sold more tickets. Television ratings surged. Merchandise disappeared from shelves. Social media engagement exploded. Suddenly, people who had never watched a WNBA game before were paying attention. And that attention created something powerful. Influence. The kind of influence brands spend decades trying to build. The kind of influence that can't be manufactured. The kind of influence that only a handful of athletes in history have ever possessed. What made Clark different wasn't just her scoring. It wasn't just the logo threes. It wasn't even the records. It was her ability to attract attention from people who weren't traditional basketball fans. Families were watching. Young athletes were watching. Casual sports fans were watching. Even people who had never followed women's basketball were suddenly tuning in. That level of cultural impact began changing the conversation around the entire league. But while Clark was becoming the face of basketball's newest movement, another story was developing behind the scenes. The business world was watching. Major brands were watching. Executives were watching. Because whenever an athlete starts moving ratings, merchandise, and audience growth simultaneously, companies take notice. And one company in particular remained at the center of every discussion: Nike. For decades, Nike had built empires around iconic athletes. Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, Tiger Woods. Athletes whose influence stretched far beyond their sport. So naturally, fans started asking questions. Could Caitlin Clark eventually join that level of company? Could she become more than just a basketball player? Could she become a global brand? Those questions became louder with every record she broke. Louder with every sold-out arena. Louder with every television audience she attracted. Then there was Sophie Cunningham. At first glance, her connection to this story seemed unexpected. After all, conversations about billion-dollar brands and basketball icons aren't usually linked to role players and teammates. But Fever fans saw something others didn't. They noticed the chemistry, the trust, the loyalty. Whenever cameras found Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham was often nearby. Whenever pressure intensified around Clark, Cunningham seemed to step forward. Whenever the spotlight became overwhelming, she provided support. That dynamic created a unique fascination among fans. Not because of controversy, not because of gossip, but because successful superstars rarely succeed alone. Every iconic athlete eventually develops a trusted inner circle. People who understand the pressure. People who understand the expectations. People who remain loyal when the spotlight becomes overwhelming. And many Fever supporters believed Sophie Cunningham had become one of those people. That's why when conversations involving Nike, Michael Jordan, and Caitlin Clark suddenly started gaining momentum, fans immediately began wondering whether there was a bigger story developing beneath the surface. At first, it sounded impossible, but the more people talked, the more attention the story received, and the more questions started emerging, the harder it became to ignore. Because what happened next would take this conversation to an entirely different level. That's when everything changed. Because what started as a simple conversation about Caitlin Clark's growing influence suddenly turned into something much bigger, much more controversial, and much more difficult for people to ignore. The basketball world began asking a question that only a year ago would have sounded completely ridiculous. What if Nike underestimated Caitlin Clark? That question exploded across sports media. Fans debated it. Analysts discussed it. Former players weighed in. And suddenly, a growing number of people were suggesting that the biggest sports brand in the world may have failed to recognize just how valuable Caitlin Clark was becoming. Think about that for a second. We're talking about Nike, the company that built the Jordan empire, the company that helped transform athletes into global icons, the company that has spent decades identifying the next big superstar before everyone else. Yet many fans believed Nike was moving too slowly with Caitlin Clark, too cautiously, too carefully. And as her popularity continued skyrocketing, criticism started growing. Then came the first shocking twist. Michael Jordan's name entered the conversation. Not because of an official announcement, not because of a confirmed partnership, but because fans themselves started making comparisons. And those comparisons immediately caught fire. People weren't comparing playing styles. They weren't comparing championships. They were comparing influence, impact, cultural relevance, the ability to attract audiences that normally wouldn't pay attention. Suddenly, social media feeds were filled with discussions about whether Caitlin Clark had become the most powerful marketing force basketball had seen in years. The attention was overwhelming. Every post generated thousands of comments. Every discussion created new headlines. And every headline made the story grow even larger. But the real surprise wasn't Michael Jordan. The real surprise was Sophie Cunningham, because somehow her name kept appearing alongside these conversations. At first, nobody understood why. Then fans started connecting the dots. Whenever Caitlin Clark was under pressure, Sophie was there. Whenever controversy surrounded Clark, Sophie defended her. Whenever criticism intensified, Sophie remained publicly supportive. To Fever fans, that wasn't random. It was loyalty. And in the age of social media, loyalty has value. A lot of value. Supporters began creating videos highlighting their chemistry. Posts started going viral. Comment sections filled with theories. People weren't talking about basketball anymore. They were talking about branding, relationships, influence, and the type of partnerships that help create dynasties. The conversation had completely evolved. This was no longer about points per game, no longer about wins and losses, no longer about statistics. This was about power. The power to move audiences, the power to generate attention, the power to dominate headlines. And according to many fans, no player in the WNBA was doing that better than Caitlin Clark. The scary part? The momentum wasn't slowing down. It was accelerating. Every interview, every game, every appearance, every rumor, everything connected back to Caitlin Clark. And with Michael Jordan's name now being discussed alongside hers, expectations suddenly reached a completely different level. But just as fans thought they understood where the story was heading, a new wave of speculation began spreading. One that had nothing to do with basketball, nothing to do with endorsements, and nothing to do with Nike. Because behind the scenes, supporters started noticing something else entirely. Something involving Sophie Cunningham that nobody saw coming. And that discovery would send the conversation into absolute overdrive. Just when it seemed the conversation couldn't get any bigger, social media poured gasoline on the fire. Because the more fans talked about Caitlin Clark, Nike, and Michael Jordan, the more another name kept appearing in the middle of the discussion. Sophie Cunningham. At first, people dismissed it. A coincidence. A random fan theory. Nothing more. But then the clips started circulating. The interviews, the celebrations, the courtside moments, the post-game interactions, the countless examples of Sophie Cunningham standing beside Caitlin Clark during some of the biggest moments of Indiana's season. And suddenly, fans became obsessed. Not with controversy, not with drama, but with chemistry. Because supporters weren't just seeing teammates anymore. They were seeing a partnership that seemed to symbolize something bigger happening inside the Fever organization. While Clark carried the spotlight, Cunningham often carried the energy. While Clark attracted headlines, Cunningham helped shape the culture. And as Indiana continued winning games, that connection became impossible to ignore. Then came the second major twist. The conversation shifted from basketball to business. And that's when things really exploded. Fans began asking a fascinating question. What makes major brands invest in athletes? Is it championships? Statistics? Awards? Sometimes. But in today's sports world, influence matters just as much, maybe even more. The ability to generate attention, the ability to move audiences, the ability to create conversations that dominate social media for days. And nobody was creating conversations like Caitlin Clark. Every headline involving her generated engagement. Every rumor created debate. Every appearance became news. That reality started fueling even bigger speculation. Because if Caitlin Clark's influence was already reaching levels normally reserved for global superstars, then what would happen when the business world fully caught up? What would happen when brands stopped viewing her as a rising star and started viewing her as a cornerstone? The possibilities seemed endless. And that's exactly why Michael Jordan's name continued surfacing. Not because anyone claimed they were equals, not because anyone suggested identical careers, but because both names represented something larger than basketball. Influence, reach, cultural impact, the ability to attract attention from people who don't normally follow the sport. That comparison alone was enough to keep fans talking for days. But while everyone focused on Nike and Jordan, another development quietly unfolded. Sophie Cunningham's popularity started rising alongside the story. Her highlights gained traction. Her interviews generated views. Her personality attracted attention. And many Fever fans believed she had become one of the most important figures in Clark's basketball journey. Not because she scored the most points, not because she received the most headlines, but because she represented trust. And trust becomes valuable when pressure reaches extraordinary levels. The deeper fans looked, the more fascinated they became. What started as a Caitlin Clark story had transformed into something much broader. A story about influence. A story about visibility. A story about how one superstar can elevate everyone around her. And that's when the internet truly lost its mind. Because a growing number of people started asking a question nobody was discussing just weeks earlier. What if this is only the beginning? What if Caitlin Clark's current level of influence isn't the peak? What if it's merely the foundation? Because if that possibility is real, then the next chapter could completely reshape the future of women's basketball. And the reaction that followed would prove just how powerful that idea had become. Once the speculation reached mainstream sports media, there was no stopping it. The conversation was everywhere. Sports shows, podcasts, YouTube channels, social media feeds, basketball forums. Even casual fans who normally ignored endorsement news suddenly found themselves talking about Caitlin Clark. And that's when the emotional fallout truly began. Because this wasn't just another athlete signing another deal. To many supporters, this represented validation. Proof that what they had been saying for months was finally becoming impossible to deny. For over a year, Fever fans had watched Clark break records. They watched arenas sell out. They watched television ratings explode. They watched merchandise disappear from shelves. And yet many felt that parts of the sports world still underestimated what was happening. Now the conversation had changed. The same people who once questioned Clark's impact were being forced to discuss it. The same media personalities who doubted the hype were suddenly covering every development. And supporters noticed. They noticed everything. Social media became flooded with reactions. Some fans celebrated. Others argued the attention was overdue. Many simply enjoyed watching the basketball world finally acknowledge what they believed all along. That Caitlin Clark had become far more than a basketball player. She had become a cultural force. But not everyone welcomed the conversation. Critics pushed back. Some argued the coverage had become excessive. Others claimed too much attention was focused on one player. Debates erupted daily. Comment sections became battlefields. Every post generated arguments. Every headline created new controversy. And somehow, all of that attention only made Clark's influence appear even larger. Because whether people supported her or criticized her, they were still talking about her. Constantly. Meanwhile, Sophie Cunningham found herself receiving attention she never expected. Fans praised her loyalty. They praised her leadership. They praised the energy she brought to Indiana's locker room. Highlight videos featuring her began gaining traction. Interviews started circulating online. Supporters pointed to her as one of the key reasons Indiana's culture appeared stronger than ever. The buzz around her kept growing. And the more it grew, the more people connected her story to Clark's rise. Not because of rumors, not because of controversy, but because successful eras are rarely built alone. Every superstar eventually becomes surrounded by people who help sustain success. People who provide support. People who embrace the pressure. People who help navigate chaos. To many fans, Sophie Cunningham had become one of those people. That perception only increased her popularity. Then came the biggest emotional reaction of all. Fear. Not fear from fans. Fear from opposing teams. Because the conversation was no longer focused solely on what Caitlin Clark had already accomplished. It was focused on what she might accomplish next. And that possibility felt enormous. What happens if Indiana keeps improving? What happens if the Fever become championship contenders? What happens if Clark's influence continues expanding at the same pace? Those questions began dominating discussions. Because nobody seemed to have clear answers. The only thing everyone agreed on was this. The spotlight surrounding Caitlin Clark had reached another level. And if the momentum continued growing, the future could become far bigger than anyone currently imagined. But just when people thought they understood the scale of Clark's rise, a final realization started spreading through the basketball world. One that could change everything. And it centered around a possibility so massive that even longtime observers weren't sure they were ready for it. And that's when the biggest realization of all started taking shape. Not inside an arena, not during a game, not from a record-breaking performance, but from the sheer amount of attention surrounding Caitlin Clark. Because the deeper people looked, the harder it became to compare her to anyone else currently playing in the WNBA. Everywhere they turned, the evidence seemed to point in the same direction. Ratings surged when she played. Attendance increased when she visited. Merchandise sold at extraordinary levels. Social media engagement exploded. And perhaps most importantly, people who had never cared about the WNBA before suddenly cared now. That kind of influence is rare. Extremely rare. It's the type of influence that changes business decisions. The type of influence that attracts major brands. The type of influence that transforms athletes into icons. And that's why conversations involving Nike and Michael Jordan suddenly felt so significant. Not because of what had already happened, but because of what might happen next. Because once an athlete reaches a certain level of visibility, the game changes. The opportunities become bigger. The expectations become bigger. And the stakes become bigger. Much bigger. The basketball world began realizing that Caitlin Clark might be approaching that threshold. The point where she stops being viewed as merely a star player and starts being viewed as something else entirely. A brand, a movement, a symbol of an era. And that's where Sophie Cunningham unexpectedly re-entered the conversation. Because as fans discussed Clark's future, many also began talking about the people around her. The teammates, the relationships, the support system, the individuals helping shape Indiana's identity. Supporters argued that one of the reasons Clark's transition to professional basketball had been so successful was the environment developing around her. An environment built on trust, chemistry, energy, and belief. That's why Sophie Cunningham's name kept appearing, not because she was chasing headlines, but because fans believed she represented something important. The type of teammate every superstar needs when the spotlight becomes overwhelming. The type of teammate who helps sustain success. And the type of teammate whose value often becomes clear long before the rest of the world notices. Meanwhile, the Nike conversation continued gaining momentum. The Michael Jordan comparisons continued generating debate. And every new discussion seemed to lead back to the same conclusion. Caitlin Clark's influence was still growing. Not stabilizing. Not slowing down. Growing. That realization created one final question. A question nobody seemed able to answer. What happens if this isn't the peak? What happens if the current version of Caitlin Clark is only the beginning? Because that's the possibility keeping fans fascinated right now. The Fever are still developing. The roster is still evolving. The chemistry is still improving. And yet the attention surrounding Clark already feels enormous. Imagine what happens if championships enter the equation. Imagine what happens if more records fall. Imagine what happens if her influence continues expanding into areas far beyond basketball. That's why people can't stop talking. Because the next chapter feels unpredictable. The next opportunity feels massive. And the next headline could be bigger than anything we've seen so far. Michael Jordan, Nike, Sophie Cunningham, Caitlin Clark. Four names that somehow found themselves connected in one rapidly growing conversation. But if recent history has taught us anything, it's this. Whenever Caitlin Clark becomes the center of attention, the story is rarely as big as what comes next. What makes this story so fascinating isn't just the rumors. It isn't just the Nike buzz. And it isn't even the fact that Michael Jordan's name somehow found its way into the conversation. It's what all of it represents. Because whether every rumor becomes reality or not, one thing has become impossible to ignore. Caitlin Clark's influence continues to grow. Every game creates headlines. Every milestone sparks debate. Every appearance generates attention. And every new conversation seems bigger than the last. That's why so many fans believe we're watching something special unfold in real time. Not just the rise of a superstar, but the rise of a player who may redefine what success looks like in women's basketball. And as that spotlight grows, the people around her continue attracting attention as well, including Sophie Cunningham, whose connection to Clark has become one of the most talked about storylines among Fever fans. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think Caitlin Clark is already the most influential player in the WNBA? Do you believe Nike fully understands her value? And how important do you think Sophie Cunningham has become to the Fever's culture and success? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because if the momentum around Caitlin Clark keeps growing at this pace, the next story could be even bigger than this one.